So welcome to this first session. We'll call it a study on prayer. And that's a big topic, admittedly. And basically, when you look at just the variety of faiths in the world, every one of them incorporates prayer, whether it's the, sort of the ornate rituals within Native American tradition or Eastern Orthodox Christianity, or the quiet rituals of prayer within Quakerism, or even a Buddhist puja. It's prayer is a part of every sort of religious gathering. Okay, there's something about prayer that has this universal quality. And any of you, maybe a lot of you, have also heard the fact that even atheists pray at different times. That whole foxhole prayer thing, when you're in a foxhole, everyone's a believer kind of thing. It's just prayer is something that, at least in a larger sense, we're all connected to, we're all aware of, at least, within our religious practice, maybe even within our personal practice. And of course, people pray for all sorts of reasons, right? We pray because we want to say thank you for the blessings we've received in life. We pray because, we want to express our awe at the majesty or at the tragedy of life, both ends of the spectrum. We pray because we need courage in times of struggle. We want answers in times of confusion, or at least direction. We sometimes pray because we want to be reminded that we're not alone. There's a lot of reasons we pray. And when I looked up the word prayer, one of the derivatives of prayer is the Latin word precari, which also is a root for the word precarious. And so there's something interesting about that connection between precarious and prayer, in the sense that we often pray when we're feeling desperate, or prayer emerges in those times when we sort of become more aware of how precarious life is, and maybe our lives can be. There's a lot of studies that talk about prayer, whether it's the Pew Research or just other studies about prayer. And the truth is, when people are asked about prayer, 9 out of 10, and I'm really speaking to those who sort of identify with some sort of faith right here. It's a little easier to quantify this. But within people who identify with any faith tradition, about 9 out of 10 affirm having a prayer life, but far fewer affirm having a satisfactory prayer life, by whatever definition. And there's something there to that, because there's a lot of rubs about prayer. It's sort of like we have this, there's prayer in theory, and then prayer in practice, and what that looks like and what that adds up to, and where we bump into things that can be really challenging. So that's part of what I want to, get into a little bit, about what it is, what prayer is. Thomas Merton has a beautiful quote about prayer that I think lends to this. It speaks to the universal drive within maybe human beings and maybe all of creation. I'd open it up that far. But what he says is, prayer is an expression of who we are. We are living in completeness. And we are a gap, an emptiness that calls for fulfillment. And when I read that quote, it reminded me of Shel Silverstein's book, The Missing Piece. And so many of us go through our lives looking for that thing that will fill our emptiness, and how many of us spend far too much time seeking the things that will not satisfy. And prayer is that place where those deep longings can be met. Now, having said that, many people, if you're not someone that is connected to faith or spirit, many people who are skeptical would look at prayer as a waste of time. Those who are, say, practitioners of a faith look at the idea of prayer, at least, if not the practice, as being one of the best ways to spend time. Okay? Personally, as someone who identifies as a practitioner of Christianity, I affirm the second. I believe the second. I give myself to that prayer is one of the best times, if not the best use of my time and practice. And yet, there have been many times where I have found myself wondering about how effective prayer is, or doubting or questioning what it's all for. And I've asked the questions that many of us have asked, many of you have asked. Why does God even care about my concerns, about me as an individual? Does God really know me? Does reaching out in prayer mean anything, really? Is anyone listening? Why does it seem sometimes that the responses to prayer are so inconsistent, even capricious? If there's someone that has a lot of people praying for them, like at church, do their prayers tend to get answered more than someone that only has a few people praying for them? Why does God sometimes feel so close, and then at other times I have no sense of God's presence? Does prayer change God, or does prayer change me? These are just some of the questions that come up. And I name them because doing a study like this is not just about an academic pursuit. It's not like a linear thing. We are learners of prayer and practitioners of prayer. And a class like this is intended to get underneath prayer as a concept, as a practice, as a tradition, as much as we can, without trying to be overly comprehensive. I'm not going to go through every single thing and try to because that would just bludgeon it. It would take the life out of it. And I think prayer is not something we fully apprehend, maybe ever, but certainly not just through academic or cognition. It's more connected to opening ourselves up to something greater than that which we can know, and into that realm of this mysterious connection to something that's unknowable and yet deeply embraceable, something along those lines. So this class, this 6-session course is going to take into account some biblical understandings of what prayer is, what it is, how we do it, why we do it, does it change anything, does it work, that idea. We're going to look at some of what Scripture has to say. We're going to look at what some spiritual masters and authors have to say throughout time, because there's some really wonderful, rich insights that we can learn from. And through that, not only will we get behind it and get underneath it so that we might understand it better, but really that we might become better practitioners of it. Better, it may not be the best word, deeper practitioners of it. Because ultimately, prayer is not about, kind of this linear thing, kind of put the coins in and get what we want kind of thing. It's more about a connection, a communion, a relationship of communion with God. And so that is where we want to see the variety, I guess, of what prayer is and perhaps can be. And some of that is going to rely on what your individual understandings and experiences of it are. Okay. So it's kind of like we're taking a leap together. Some of the courses, when we go into them, when you read a book of the Bible, you kind of know a beginning and an end point. We're kind of leaping into the abyss here, and we may not have a parachute. Okay. That's all right. It's good. It's a Zoom class, so we're okay. But so that's really, to the best of my ability, that's a way of summarizing what we're going to be doing here. But Before I get into, some questions that you may have and some thoughts that you may have based on what I just said, when I had Kay send out the Zoom link, did I include the schedule already? Did you already see a schedule? Okay, then let me just share this, and I'll make sure she sends it out to you. But here is the schedule of what we're doing. So today is we're talking about introduction and what our perspectives of prayer are. But then there's 6 sessions total. Again, don't worry about writing this down now. I just wanted you to see it, that I do have it, and I'll make sure that Kay sends this out to you so you can print this out. But each week I will make sure that I give you the upcoming readings for next week as a reminder. So with all of that, any questions or comments before we get into some of the other intentions and topics for today?
Can I dive into that, Dan?
Yeah, go for it, Judy.
I've been reading, I don't remember how I found the book, but Prayer in the Night by Trish Harrison Warren. And I guess what my question is her premise is there's a very big place for established historical prayer liturgy, and that by going to the time-tested formula, it can help us develop a prayer life. Mm-hmm. And so my question for you is, we don't have the Book of Common Prayer. Is there some tradition in our heritage that if I wanted to take that approach, other than saying pick up the Bible and look at Psalms, is there an established historical liturgy that I could look to?
Yes. Well, part of it is that our tradition has emerged through and out of some of those traditions. So within our context, we don't necessarily have the Book of Common Prayer, but we have the Book of Worship that we've taken and kind of created and has incorporated a liturgy of prayers. So you could look at that. But then within the broader tradition, there are many other approaches and effective ways of doing prayer. And in the UCC, we don't aim to be exclusive. We aim to sort of see the breadth and the richness of the variety of approaches to prayer. So it gives us the freedom to look at something which is more of a Catholic tradition called Lectio Divina, which is really looking prayerfully at various scriptures, and not so academically, but just more devotionally, but in a certain way, in a patterned way, which can be very enriching for our prayer life. Then there's other ways of prayer, like centering prayer. Basil Pennington wrote an amazing book about centering prayer, which isn't necessarily from our tradition and isn't necessarily rooted specifically in Lectio Divina style prayer, but it's a very specific approach that allows for a beautiful development of prayer life. You could look to ancient books like The Cloud of Unknowing, some of these mystical books that really kind of open things up. And to me, all of those books or all of those approaches are incredibly powerful. But our intention now is to maybe look at, kind of on a survey level, what they are, what the intentions and purposes of prayer are within maybe our tradition, within our experiences, within broader traditions, to have a better understanding, so that itself will add a deepening to whatever approaches we might take. So this class, I feel like could supplement well that book you're reading or a variety of resources you might try to use. Now, some of them will come up with different things. Our approach is not, and this is part of our theology. Within our church, our theology is not like some of the traditions that say God is all-powerful, all-knowing, in charge of every detail, causes every single thing to happen. There are some within some traditions that practice that theology. Our theology is less that. It's not that in general. I'm not saying that there aren't people within this class that might believe that, but our practice and our messages are not about God being like a Geppetto pulling all the strings to every single thing that happens. That creates a way of prayer that God has all the answers all the time. And so we have to pray hard enough to get, the answers. And if we're not getting the answers we want, it means we're not praying hard enough. You see where that can go. You see how that can create some real illness in our relationship with God. But our approach is more that while God is that creator over all, and that there's this powerful aspect to God, God's not micromanaging every single detail, causing every single thing to happen. Maybe that's helpful, how I just said that. Maybe that's not. We will sort of be, through the course of this class, picking up on that sort of theme again. So it'll come up again, but it's one of those approaches to prayer that sort of, it depends. There are some assumptions you can make that certain traditions do make about prayer and what its purposes are. For our class, that is not our approach, at least not my approach. I should say it that way, not my approach to prayer. Thank you for that, Judy. Any other reflections or comments before we jump into anything else? Yeah, Bonnie.
Well, what you just said sort of jostled my mind in praying for God's will. We pray that your will be done, which is what Christ prayed when he was in the garden. But I can see how praying for God's will can lead to what you just said.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's a continuum where you don't want to be going off the cliff, but you want to have some faith along the way that God has a plan. I mean, that's the whole thing. Does God have a plan? That's another,
yes,
probably
yes,
a whole
and that
other
is
topic.
The whole thing. Yeah, right.
But anyway,
it's true.
I'm really looking forward to this class.
I'm trying not to make it an either. By saying what I just said, I'm saying my tendency is to approach from that position that God is not the one pulling the strings on every single thing, that happened. God does not cause the natural disaster, does not cause the innocent children or people to die, those kinds of things. But certain approaches to prayer and to God's relationship to the world do take that tact. And that leads us down very specific paths as we move along in our lives. And prayer can certainly relate to that. So anyway, we will be touching on that sort of continuum that you named, and that tension at times. But to me, that's part of the important work of considering this broad and challenging topic. Did I see another hand up? Or anyone else that wanted to comment on anything? Okay. Oh, Bob, go for it.
Well, it just reminds me of thinking about what prayer is. And it reminds me of something that Horty has said, and that is, if you don't ask, the answer is no.
Yeah, well, there's something about that. And I think even that, the way we do prayer, and this is what we're going to talk about. What is it? Maybe let's read the scripture. I want to read a sort of a grounding scripture, but I want to get into that, what you just said, Bob, and kind of what that brings up for me, because it's really, it opens up a lot of just rich questions in my mind. So I'll hold that just for a moment, unless and if there's anyone else that wants to make a comment, then there's still room for that. If not, go ahead, Bonnie.
Well, following up on what Bob said, I was always taught, well, the answer, if you're asking for something, the answer can always be yes, no, or wait. But I kind of thought, well, that's a cop-out, because that just means, maybe it helps to pray and maybe not, I don't know. I got the sun in my eyes, but
you do. But you're
anyway.
naming what is such an experience that many of us have in our prayer lives, that there's times where we're going along smoothly and our prayer life feels so satisfying and so connected. And then something can happen that can throw us or make us ask those questions that you just asked. And all of a sudden we're just sort of thrown for a loop. And within the biblical tradition, there's a lot of reflection on this. And then post-biblical and throughout the last 2,000 years, there's been a lot of wonderful reflection on this, plus then the experiences of your own lives. We want to try to take all of that into account as we look at, what it is that leads us to a sense of richness and depth, and then also leads us to those obstacles or bumping places that make us feel, like, what the heck's this all about? Why am I, what is this for? That sort of thing, because it's all part of it. And I think that is actually part of a healthy faith, is one where we're bumping up against, some of those elements within ourselves, those so-called demons, those obstacles, those challenges. We've said it before. The name Israel itself means the one who struggles with God. The walk of faith is that, and prayer is no different. Yes, Patty. You're still muted.
One of the things that is important to me is that the saying from Jesus that I've come to bring you life and life more abundant. And also that the kingdom of heaven isn't really like what you think it is, that it's a different thing than you think. And those two partner for me when it comes to prayer. It invites me to see, however I construct it, it's not that. At least for me, it's not that. I will continually try to construct it through petition, through praise, through all the different iterations that we call prayer. But my experience is so far that it's never the same thing. And it's always me trying to impose on it a certain pattern that will benefit me in some way, not necessarily personally, but so I'll feel confident more that God is something that I can both imagine and value. And sometimes that doesn't happen.
Right.
So in the places where it doesn't happen, in the places where I have been most stressed, I have come to know life more abundant. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I hope that in this class that we can find that similar release into imagination, that we can both construct and deconstruct some of the ways that we pray, and maybe not hold on so tightly to one way, but to become explorers, become true pilgrims of the faith who wander about and look and appreciate and kind of intentionally look at things from new perspectives with that sense of wonder. If we can approach prayer like that, rather than this sort of trying to find the right way to do it, that can easily happen, because when prayer's not working according to what we're hoping, then we find sometimes we're in that place of, well, I must be not doing it right. How do I do it right, Pastor? Can you pray for me? You're closer to God. We go through all these things, right? And that's just, there's so many. I'm trying to name some here and there. You've got your own places where the questions that have come up for you. We all go through it. And so this class, I hope, frees us into from some of those ways that can tie us in knots, and open us to a greater imagination of connection to this wonder, this creator that is beyond all knowing and yet part of our every breath. So yeah, that's it. That's all we're trying to do. Just that. So, anyone else? Oh, yes, Kathleen.
Well, I often have, wondered too, and when Bonnie talks about yes, no, wait, sometimes I think, that, and I cling to this, I don't know that I just cling to it, but I go back to this poem written by, they think, a Jewish prisoner in Auschwitz or in the concentration camps. And I believe in the sun, even when it's not shining. I believe in love, even when I don't feel it. I believe in God, even when he is silent.
Yeah.
And I often think of, especially the last line, so I guess I say I do cling to that. Yeah.
No, that's powerful. I mean, and the context of that prayer is incredibly poignant. And I think that very prayer touches on the humanity that Thomas Merton was speaking to, that there's something within us that drives us sometimes, that it's almost not something we choose. It's just a part of how we're made, that we seek that depth, that something more, and we give ourselves to it, even when the circumstances seem to defy it. And there's no guarantee that happens. That's the other thing. You know, there are others who are perhaps in that same camp, who may have resigned themselves to a different approach or belief. I'm not here to judge that. All of it is within the humanity that we are. You know, life happens, and it happens hard, and it doesn't stop. And part of what this class is going to help us see is that we so often live in this illusion of control, whether there's control or order in what is a very chaotic world or our lives, and that sometimes we think of prayer as that means of control, and it's just not. Or that when we're aware that that's what we've made of it, it can break it wide open. And that's the liberating, way. It's not to berate ourselves. It really isn't, because I don't think there's a bad way to pray. We make mistakes maybe, or we fall into certain traps, or we fall into our own, tendencies, our own foibles, but it's the potential is there that it might yet open the next step that broadens the path for us. So that's our approach. There's no mistakes in prayer. There's no wrong prayer. It's just, let's deepen it. Let's open it up. Why don't we read a brief scripture passage that will ground some of what we'll be talking about today. It's Psalm 8, not very long, so I'll just ask for one volunteer, if you wouldn't mind. Someone, I'll be sharing it on the screen, so you'll be able to read it right on the screen if you want. But if you have a Bible, you're welcome to do that too. Do I have a volunteer? Bob, thank you. Okay. No, let's see. Share the screen here. I'll call it up. There you go. Just those 9 verses right there.
O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens, out of the mouths of babes and infants. You have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and all the beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth.
Thank you, Bob. The Psalms are a rich tradition. Think of them not necessarily as theological treatises, but they're worship, they're prayers, they're songs of praise and thanksgiving and lament and all these things. So when we see them, they're the expression of that particular author. And within the tradition, certainly shaped by the tradition, but that prayer is one that is just so broad, in its perspective of what prayer is. But before we get into maybe that idea, I want to just ask you, especially those that maybe hadn't had a chance yet to speak, but all are welcome, of course. How would you describe your experiences with prayer? Just if you had to, not necessarily all of them, but just when you think of prayer, what's an experience? What is your experience with prayer? And what do you think, at least at the start, what is the purpose of prayer? What do you think the purpose of prayer is?
That's
Judy?
what I was thinking earlier when we were talking before the psalm, is that I would imagine people have really different definitions of prayer. I personally have real trouble with prayer as petition. One, probably my own feelings of inadequacy and who the hell am I to ask, but it's also like, how would I know what's best? I trust God has a much broader picture. And if I were to ask for healing or what have you, I wouldn't even go into prosperity. That really bothers me. So for me, when I think of prayer, prayer is always an attempt to get closer to God, not God necessarily, but God. I mean, the God that's everywhere, that I believe, help me in my disbelief, that constant struggle of wanting to feel that presence. And I'm always looking for ways to try to deepen if I'm feeling good, or create when I'm feeling bad, that connection, never petition. And so the notion of prayer, I can't think of the words, where people come together and then they pray for specific things, that is really foreign to me.
Right. Very rich response. Thank you. That's a good starting point. And I would say, not just for you, but for anyone, for those areas that you find a bit of a rub, spend some time there. Because I think for as you rightly said, maybe it's your own sense of humility, not wanting to call attention to yourself, that, what right do I have to try to, to tug on the cloak of God and ask for what I long for. There's also the opposite side of, what right do I have not to? Or what is it that prevent, am I silencing part of myself? Because I do think if all of it is prayer, then there's still room potentially. And I only say that because you named it. I'm not trying to say this for everybody, but naming those places where you find, well, this feels like prayer and this does not. While I resonate with that, don't get me wrong, I really personally resonate with that. I also recognize that if there's a place that's causing that little, stick in the craw of your faith, of your approach, it might be worth examining, taking a look at, freeing ourselves once again. And that's the intent, to free ourselves from what maybe prayer is and isn't, getting out of that mindset, perhaps, that might just blow this wide open and create a whole different appreciation. But thank you for that starting point, because that's really helpful. Anyone else? Yes, Horty.
It may seem overly simplistic, but I really cling to an idea that I never expect prayer to change God, but to change me. And that always helps me direct my prayers, even when they start out with ranting or raving or begging or whatever. I get into the conversation and say, what?
Yeah.
Let's go back to what you really think, which is, how might you want to reframe this? How might you want to change yourself in your approach? I always feel comfortable in asking for anyone with a peace that passes all understanding.
Thank you, Horty. Yeah, a lot of us in our approach to prayer, we have this idea that there's certain ways that, we do it because, we're raised in traditions, and prayer has this solemnity to it. And my feeling is, in truth, prayer welcomes the fullness of our expression of humanity. And when you read the Psalms, you'll see so many that start with the ranting and the raving, kind of like what you were saying, and then it sort of cleanses and clears. And then they move into a different expression. Psalm 22 is a beautiful example of that. You know, that's the words that are on Jesus' lips on the cross. So yeah. And I don't know, you know, within our tradition, within our worship services on Sunday and the way we do prayer, it still is fairly buttoned up. I don't know if that's the right word. It's very sort of formalized. And yet I try to create and select prayers that are sort of real and honest and not trying to be all churchy. But that's something to explore within our lives. Do we have permission? Really, do we have permission? And do we take advantage of that permission to be our full selves in our prayer lives? I struggle with that. And I see it reflected in my struggle to fully emote in various areas of my life. So yeah, it's just that bears deep consideration in our prayer. Can we bring our full self? Patty?
I think some of the most profound experiences with prayer for me are the times when I was deeply troubled and wanted something and got it, and was bewildered. I mean, I think it's easy to think of God saying no because he knows better. It's hard for me to think that I might know something too. It's hard to have a relationship with God that isn't diminutive of myself.
Yes.
And one of the most profoundly troubling and amazing experiences was prayer for my daughter's life when she was 10, and the whole experience around that being answered, and her in her unconscious state having a talk with God and saying, you either let me go back or you get me to heaven, but don't leave me here. And she's 10, right? She's not worried about how she looks to God. She's just trusting. And the experience of her, because she had already had last rites, Catholic at the time, and the experience of her being able to crawl up out of darkness in her, that's how she described it, and come back and be conscious in the ICU and have that experience reflected in a passage of light from her to her friend. That was a powerful and very confusing and terrifying experience for me. It was an answered prayer, and it was like, I don't want life to be like that. In a way, it's not orderly enough when it's like that. I can't make any sense of it.
Right.
I can only be grateful and terrified, and that's a profound place to be. It never has left me, that experience. It's one that says, who in the heck are you, God? Who in the heck am I, Patty?
Yeah.
That's all.
Thank you, Patty. That's a profound story. And I love that image of feeling, grateful and terrified before God. And maybe we could use the word awe, awe-filled, but terrified is what you chose. And I think it's okay to kind of to see that and feel that. And so often with our prayer or with our faith lives or our approach to life, like you said, we're trying to lay order on top of something that isn't so ordered and may well actually be chaotic. We're always trying to assign order and control. And so therein lies the rub. And maybe the answer is, I don't know. And maybe the deepest place of faith in particular instances is simply gratitude and awe or terror. I mean, this group, well, it's been a number of years, so there's a number of you that weren't part of our study of Job. But the study of Job is a profound exploration, really, of prayer. A lot of it is about prayer, isn't it? And you go through that story and, Job loses everything. And his friends come in and they give him all this advice. Not very helpful, terrible advice, actually. And he gets to a place where finally he is able to have a court hearing before God. And Job lays out his complaints very human, very real, very righteous. And I think were we in Job's place, we couldn't have done better, than to express it the way he did. And then in chapters 38 to 40, and I would invite you to reread them. I'm going to summarize it just briefly because I think it's so instructive. God's answer, he never really answers Job's question, but he asks the whole, where were you when the lightning bolt struck? Where were you when I created the crocodile, the ostrich, the rattlesnake? He names so many different creatures, and part of the point is that there's so much of creation on this planet and beyond that is not centered or made for humanity. What are we going to do with an ostrich or a crocodile? Mostly we just stay away, that sort of thing. Not the point of those chapters is that God is going through and saying, Job, there is so much more that your perspective doesn't allow for right now. So I'm asking you to kind of let me be God and stay focused. Look, what happened to you happened, but to stay in that place of wanting to control, wanting to pull the arm of God like a vending machine is a very destructive place. And it's a place that's filled with, at least in the tenor of Job, it's a hubris place. Because in reality, as Patty was saying, a lot of times when we think of our relationship with God, it's very diminutive. We're smaller than God. And that's true. But at the same time, we are larger than that too. So Job is playing with that reality that remember our place, that we are not God, but also remember that we are a part of something that is way bigger than we can ever realize. So in that sense, let go. There's a bigger picture here, a larger system, and so Job is in effect that the story of Job is trying to teach those who read it and all of us today about having a larger perspective in our faith and perhaps in our prayer. And maybe, as some say, it's like learning to pray from God's perspective. What do you think, if you had to think about what that would look like, if you had to start to pray? A lot of us are myopic. We're very self-centered, in our prayer. And again, it's not a judgment. It's stating it that is what we do. We pray for things that really relate to us. But what do you think that would look like? What would it mean to sort of start to pray from God's perspective, God's point of view? How would you even do that? Jane?
I feel like this last 2 years has been a time where God has stretched me to try to look at things more from his perspective.
Yeah.
Because it's been such a time of chaos, division, fear, health, all the different crises. And I have been so grateful that our church takes the stance of God is still speaking. Because for me, in my prayers and in my constant trying to make sense of all of it and live and be the light, it is God speaking through so many, many, many different ways, people, organizations, podcasts, everything you can think of, that God answered prayers within me that I had of confusion, of doubt, of fear, of concern, because he was helping me see it from his perspective through other people. Mm-hmm. And I just felt so at the end of 2021, as I reflected back after New Year's, that's how I felt God answered my prayers, was through so many people. And Dan, your sermons, the Bible studies, so many things are part of that, So yeah, I felt God really tried to share with me personally his perspective this year.
And that can happen. And I have seen it too, Jane. Thank you for that. That whole way that sometimes when we're broken down, when we're brought to our knees, when we're humbled, that's when the sponge of our soul is wet and softened and ready to receive the message of God and the presence of God in a way that maybe we weren't when we were going along as if everything was cool and you know, we're the masters of our universe kind of thing. And that I have seen that happen, and these last 2 years have been very humbling, because a lot of us have seen, you know, wow, there's not a lot of control that we have over what's been happening. And obviously there's a lot of resistance to that too, that idea. And it's not an either or, it's just a recognition, or it's a chance to move through it, I think, in the way that you just named, Jane. That way of receiving this as an opportunity for the deepening of faith and connection to God. And even though it's been super hard to have human community in the last 2 years, you found a way to have it, to find it. We're doing it now. Yeah, it's different. It's not our ideal, whatever. It's still happening. We're doing the best we can, but that is so vital, because you named it yourself. It's often through other people, through the little sparks of light, that we start to, you know, remind ourselves, you know, like the Christmas Eve service, remind ourselves that all is not darkness, and that God works through people and other, you know, elements within creation. So it's not all about, you know, me. That can help broaden us in times like this, for sure. Anyone else have a comment? Yes, Margaret. Please unmute. We want to hear you. Still muted. Let's see. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Got it.
Okay. You know how I feel about prayer. We've had experiences in our sessions with faith renewal. I love talking to God. I just do that. I don't know if this is a prayer, but I feel good about talking about things that I see, and I thank him for it, but I'm not requesting anything. But I kind of feel like he's going to help me when I have a problem. We can talk about it.
Yeah. And one of the things I remember from your life, Margaret, that you shared was when you were younger, and you had an experience that you called a near-death experience, that there was something that happened. I can't remember if it was water, but it was an experience that when you nearly lost it all, and you found such a presence of God in that moment. And it made me think about, you know, how many times in our lives, you know, when something like that happens, it changes us. It changes our whole approach to what life is about. Right. And I just see that in you, you know, that this way that you have this conversational relationship with God is such a powerful expression. It's a beautiful metaphor for, you know, kind of like strolling down a lane.
Yes, that's right. That's just exactly. And since my stroke, I didn't realize it, but I was accepting it. It is what it is. You know, I wasn't asking for help, but I was given a book at Christmas by Jesus Always by Sarah Young. And you read a page a day. And I thought, oh my gosh, I slipped. That's not, I hate to admit that, but I did slip. And now I'm feeling much better about it.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I hope we look, somehow, I hope we find that permission, that grace, I don't know, within ourselves, where we can admit our slips without fear of pointing fingers or anything like that, you know, because it's all of us. It's all of us. I mean, when I see so many prayers, whether from others or within myself, how many times have I basically been seeing what are nothing more than instructions to God, as if the prayer that I'm lifting up or someone else is lifting up is, oh, this is the first time God's heard this. You know, I'm basically sharing this with you, God, because you haven't heard this before and you're not aware of this. So I'm going to let you know what's happening. And it's a beautiful and very, like, it's such a, I don't know, human way of approaching prayer. You know, it's just sort of when we lift it up and it's like, well, I'm going to let you know. And what it represents is still that urge that we have to be in some measure of control, you know, and that's the challenge. That's what's hard, is to how do we, you know, what do you think could happen if we actually let go of that control and really intentionally chose to do as Psalm 46 says, and be still and know that I am God. Yeah. And that's the image that comes up for me when I think of you walking down the lane, talking to God. That whole idea, even though walking isn't, well, walking is in a way, it can be a form of stillness. But what do you think? What would happen in your prayer life, in our prayer life, if you really gave yourself to that practice of be still and know that I am God?
That's hard for me because I like to talk. But but you're right. I felt that with this book that I'm reading.
Yeah.
That first thing he says, be still, for I am God. And I thought, well, that is so powerful.
Yeah.
I'm still in awe of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it brings us back to that gratitude and awe and even terror that Patty mentioned. That it just allows us to not try to solve it and get in there like this, but just to appreciate it and to witness it in a as full a perspective as possible. Because the truth is, we're talking about what does it look like to pray from God's perspective? We don't know. How do we really know? But to even try to open ourselves, it just kind of breaks us out of the myopia that some of us that is a part of, you know, many times our lives and our approach to not just prayer, but to many aspects and elements of our lives. So, you know, this idea of being still, it's another Latin word that the Latin word for be still is, I think it's vacate, which is it's the root for vacation. So I love that idea of, you know, be still and know that I am God is like, you know what, take a vacation from your need to control everything and let God be God. And that at its best, it just feels so freeing, you know, doesn't give me answers. And in fact, sometimes when I think of vacation, it's not the most relaxing always, but nonetheless, it's an invitation to free ourselves from the things that we often bring to the table with our prayer. And again, not to say that they're bad or good, but to free ourselves from those patterns, to notice them, to free ourselves from them, and then to maybe see what that freedom creates within us. You know, what if we did put that into practice? What would it look like? You know, stillness, knowing that God is, knowing not just here, but knowing in all of our possible ways of apprehending. You know, that's a practice. You see, this isn't just something we talk about. Talking is obviously very important, but how do we then practice? What does that practice look like, to be still and know that God is? I believe in a very real way that to practice doing that is a way of glimpsing that God perspective, that broader perspective in our prayer and in our existence, really. So anyone else have any thoughts about that, the whole idea of what it looks like to practice being still and knowing that God is? Yes, Patty. Unmute. You're still muted, Patty.
I wanted to follow up on what Jane said about valuing the idea that God is still speaking and connecting that with the idea of being still. I love Henry Nouwen's idea of prayer, which is to read the Bible, to be quiet, and then to reflect with a spiritual director, that to not be separate all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes spiritual directors are part of a group on prayer, but not staying only within ourselves. And part of that, how it connects to God is still speaking, is the idea that God is a verb, and God is a verb that we've teased out somehow in our reflections on God as a dynamic verb of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That God is a community. God invites us to community, and God lives as community in love. Richard Rohr talks about God as a community of dynamic love. And the idea of still speaking is that somehow the God in us is being continually revealed. And we are evolving. All of us are evolving. Yes. Our ideas of God are evolving. Once upon a time, we only saw God as, the one who brought rain or the one who brought this. And we had a bunch of gods. And then we had one God. Now we have a community of gods. Who knows what we'll have in 20 to 200 years? And that's okay, because not only are our ideas of God changing, but we are changing. And we are part, and I wouldn't say it's an experiment, but of a dynamic of loving growth, yes, of being fully human, whatever that means. And that's at this moment, that's how I see it, idea.
Yes. That
perspective, but I figure it'll change.
It always is, and it is developing and growing. And here's the other thing we can find ourselves, or that relates to what you said. Sometimes when we hear these words from folks like Henry Nouwen, these spiritual masters, these enlightened ones, they can be liberating to us, but they can also be sort of, well, that's them. They're on that level. I'm here, so we can do that and create that distance that you named. That is not the point. And one of the powerful things, is when we get behind it, about some of these spiritual masters, we see them, if we can see them in their fullness of humanity. I took a class called Van Gogh and Nouwen by a woman who knew and worked with Henry Nouwen in seminary. And she described him as one of the most nervous, neurotic people who had a hard time accepting that God loved him. Now, that is very different than the words he would say, but it's not inconsistent. And I think when we put people on a pedestal, that's to our downfall, whether it's the minister, whether it's our neighbor, whether it's Henry Nouwen or even Mother Teresa. One of the best things that happened in terms of appreciating the faith of Mother Teresa, in my opinion, is her journals that named the dark night of the soul that existed for her most of her life of service. What I hope that does is embraces the fullness of our humanity, and it is not about a mountain peak that we are ascending to get to find perfection. It is just not about that. It's about embracing the fullness of the journey, the change that is here and now and to come, and our potential for growth. And I find that's one of the biggest challenges for me. I still judge myself when I fall down. I still judge myself when I don't get it right. I still tend to want to stop doing something when I keep making mistakes. I'm not good at that. I'm going to go do something else. I do that with prayer. If we can unlearn that, what would that do? How would that help us to continue to be still and know God is. Maybe it would enable us to be still for the first time, not in resignation, not in giving up, but in surrender. There's a difference. In willing giving of ourselves to something greater. There's a lot of ways we can put this into practice. Yeah, Judy.
As so much of life for me, I think, because I'm maybe a logical thinker, I think there's going to be so much about semantics in this, because when I think of prayer, it's a certain thing. And hearing other people speak, I journal every morning. And that sometimes is like what I ate yesterday, but always it includes conversation with God. I am constantly also walking through the world, having comments. You know, it's a one-way street. I don't hear answers, but I chat away all the time. So when I'm thinking though about prayer, it's a very different thing. And I do have a centering prayer practice, and that's different from what I am thinking of as this group. That's to me that moment where you try awfully hard to be quiet and invite God's presence and action into your life, but you're not hearing him yip. When I do Lectio, those are times I almost feel like I get messages from God when something pops out of what I'm reading. But I guess when I thought of this group, and it shows you how everyone maybe understands things differently, I am thinking of prayer in a very directed way. And I keep experimenting with how I am formally creating something more that is ritual. And that's one more way for connecting with God. So that's how I think I'm approaching. And when you asked, what would God's praying look like? I mean, immediately went to, well, it's light and noise. I mean, we can't make sense of that. But then I tried to get past that. And it was, I think he'd have one prayer. It's like, help me connect. How do I connect with these? How do I connect with creation? I think that's what God's prayer would be.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think, ritual helps us to find a path and to create a discipline that can keep us on a path, which is often helpful. It is not it's like that old story, the Buddhist story, we're all pointing to the moon, but the finger is not the moon. The way is its own path to it, but it's just one of many. So that is, there's a lot of value in creating those disciplines and rituals that help guide us and keep us moving in a certain direction. Yet it's always worth exploring. All right, what is it? How am I being still? How can I listen more? How can I and maybe just giving yourselves to practices that open it up, continue to open up that sense of connection. A couple months ago, we were hiking we started at the confluence and we walked up, and then we hiked up the trail that takes us all the way to the top of the Forest Hill Bridge. And we were going to do a loop, and we did a loop that went down to the opposite side of the confluence. And what's really cool is when you get to the top of the Forest Hill Bridge, you can look down and you can see all those people on the path below you. And when I asked the question about the God's perspective thing, it made me kind of think of that, looking down and seeing these little moving people. And we were down there too. We were down there walking, and we were in our own world in our lives. And now I'm looking at them, and they may not even realize that I'm there and looking at them. And there's just something that's it reminds me that I am small, that I am not the center of all. And yet I am a part of a bigger reality of something that is created and so loved beyond measure that I can't comprehend that either. If there's a duality, that's the confluence right there to me. That's the point where prayer meets us. And so our rituals can open us to a lot of that. But I like in my own practice to find those ways that keep shifting that perspective. And so today I'm focusing on, what is it, in your own lives that can help you practice being still and knowing that God is. I saw a friend who posted on Facebook the other day, just 2 days ago. She's a nurse on Cape Cod. She was driving home from a night out, restaurant, whatever, not too late, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. And there was a car, she's on the highway. There was a car flying down, going the wrong direction, right in front of her. She sees the car in front of her swerve to get out of the way. This guy who's coming the wrong way on the highway clips it, sends that car spinning, swerves just in front of them, and smashes into the center divider. She, as a nurse, immediately pulls over and goes to help this guy. In the end, he wasn't life-threatening, but he was very drunk. And in that moment, finally everything worked out. No one was seriously hurt, thankfully. But her perspective, what she wrote about was that I had this incredible sense of how many times has that happened? How have I been in the presence of something where I'm completely out of control, and something like that can happen. And it changed her whole, she just said, it reminded me one more time of how little control I have. So to be so appreciative of what I have and the moment I have in the now. And to find my way to, once again, the gratitude and the terror, the awe of what is right now. And how many times in our lives, how many days do we just sort of routinely and numbly go through our moments? Maybe developing a prayer life helps us to sensitize to all of the fullness, more fullness of life. I think that's a big part of what prayer can open us up to. And as we learn how to be still, we also learn how to live. When I was a hospice chaplain, when I was in the presence of death, it made me savor life and see where life happens in the surprising places where I never thought it would or could. These kind of things can happen when we open ourselves to the presence of God in the stillness, in the moments, in the out of controlness, as we release that control. That is something. There's something there, I think, of what God's perspective is like in prayer when we release control. Any other thoughts or comments about this opening? Bob?
I think there we go. Many times in times I felt I had no control, I would pray for strength to deal with that. Just pray for, give me the strength to help me deal with this situation.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful prayer, because we're not trying to perhaps orchestrate outcomes, but asking for something that's more in alignment with what Thomas Merton was saying, recognizing the gap, the incompleteness, the absence of understanding, the longing for healing and wholeness that may or may not be a product of a cure, but that there's something more than our circumstances and than our experiences. That is a tough perspective. And I don't judge anyone, because some circumstances in our lives push us to the brink of our ability to do what you just said, Bob, where we do find ourselves praying for specific outcomes. And we do long for something to change in the way we want it to. Yeah. And I say that is all beautiful prayer before God. And I pray we open ourselves beyond that approach, but I do not push that under the rug. I think it's all, when we can accept the fullness of our humanity in our prayer, we are growing in our prayer. When we can express the fullness of humanity in our prayer, that's another sign. Got a little homework for you, and I'm very interested to see how this plays out. A lot of us find a sense of God's presence in nature. It's a very powerful metaphor for God oftentimes. So I want you sometime this week to find something in nature that serves as a metaphor for prayer for you. Okay? Sunrise, river, ocean, whatever. Find something. Could be something much more subtle than that. And I'm asking you to observe it closely and consider, maybe even write down, but consider how it is functioning, how it plays out, how it expresses a metaphor to your prayer life. You know, maybe your prayer life as it is, maybe it's your prayer life as you hope for it to be. But find a metaphor in nature and play with it as an expression of your prayer life. And then next week, I would love to hear from many, if not all of you, about what presented itself to you. Are you clear on the assignment? I'll do the same. I'll do the same, and let's see what comes up. I mean, every time I watch Peter's background on this thing, that's a prayer right there. I was just thinking the same thing. The breeze through a palm tree, it just does it. It's something about it, but that's it. Pay attention to it. And again, it could be something that's not at all sort of, you know, objectively beautiful or whatever, but yeah, whatever speaks to you this week. But let's to hone it in a bit, even though it's still very broad, but let's find something in nature, okay? That is a metaphor for our prayer life. For next week, I will be sending out the schedule and the notes. When I print them out, they will always have the readings for the next session, but we will be reading Matthew 14, verses 8 to 15, then also 19 to 23. So we'll be reading that section. And then also Mark chapter 1, verses 29 to 37, okay, for next week. But I just want to say thank you again for coming back, for some of you who are joining us for the first time, and even those who are watching this on our church website. These classes are always so rich, and as Jane said, they are such an opportunity for a deep sharing and a chance for community, especially now in a time where it's been more difficult to find that place of community. So thank you all for your perspectives and your light. And I look forward to more of that to come. Bye, everyone. Thank you.